J'espère que tous les gens sont formidables ce matin et je veux dire quelque chose en français. C'est une grande joie pour moi d'être ici pour le 35e anniversaire de CINARS. Mes sincères remerciements à Anne-Laure Mathieu de m'avoir invité à partager quelques réflexions sur les arts et les futurs climatiques. J'espère que ces idées reflètent les façons que le changement climatique touche les expériences humaines. Veuillez accepter mes excuses pour avoir fait ma présentation en anglais. So, it's an honor to be here and to share some thoughts. Before I get into them, I would like to acknowledge all the various specialists and artists and teachers I've had over many years, different organizations I've worked for, people in different spiritual and indigenous traditions who have encouraged and taught me to try to understand how to communicate the risks we face in this century. So I hope something I say will be of use. And I don't have a scripted talk. I want to sort of speak with you more as much as is possible from my heart, and so you see the thought processes that are, I think, part of how all of us are trying to understand this changed experience we're having of the biosphere changing, the atmosphere, the oceans, our relationships. So with that view, I'd just like to ask you, how many of you are sad that there's climate change? Okay, thank you for sharing that. How many of you are really angry and pissed off there's climate change? How many of you see this as an opportunity to rebuild how we relate to one another to cope with climate change? And how many of you see the potential in the arts and all their various forms and manifestations to have some kind of impact on how people feel, hear, and touch the experience they're going through and then relate to others? Okay, good. I'm in the right room then, because those are some of the themes I'm going to touch on a bit today. So what I've been trying to tease out and understand is, what is the heart of this experience we're having? We're all in this room, and all of us are actually experiencing a changed climate. We're in it. We're in it together. It's real. It's not something that isn't happening, and yet we're faced by forces who want to tell us that the data we see and the things we observe aren't true for other reasons. So in a world where it's rather unclear sometimes where information is coming from and whether it's real and whether it's true, we somehow have to center ourselves and move forward in spite of an environment where we have to deal with other people who don't think we're making sense. So many people who are working on climate change, whether they're climate scientists or people like me, people who understand sort of at least intellectually what's happening, because I think emotionally, I find myself still not believing that we, as a collective, as a civilization, given all the knowledge we have, could actually be moving so strongly in the direction of ignoring the evidence base. And it shows how fragmented human consciousness is, and human awareness, and human perception. How each of us has to learn to live a life and grow and develop as a human being. And that developmental cycle, to become a human being, to become a fully fledged person, anyone who has children or is going through a time in their life where they're getting a degree or a certificate or going through training, know there's a process of maturation. And I think in the arts, to be an artist, to be a presenter, to be an arts organization, is to understand that things take time. And organizations develop from being fledgling, beautiful ideas and if there are opportunities, and all of you are looking for opportunities to meet the people that will take the seed of your idea and help bring it to the world, those are processes, and we like those processes to speed up. But sometimes they don't speed up in the way we would like them to. And so this collective problem of climate risk and the emotions and how we develop as human beings to learn and understand what's happening, and the forces of tension among human beings when there's also scarcity of resources. We're seeing all these issues play out. So the hearts are many, and that's why I only have a partial heart there. It's touching so many aspects of our lives, and you'll see from the pieces that I highlight. So what I've got instead of a script is just some work by artists that my son and I think have done some really interesting work. Now, my son's a visual artist who did his training in Europe, in Rotterdam and Oslo, and now is a practicing artist living up in Haida Gwaii. So I'm going to mix this presentation between some science and some art and see where we get to. So this is a concept called climate departure. And climate departure is the date after which the coldest year, in terms of average temperature, is hotter than the hottest years in the 1860 to 2005 temperature record. So basically what it means is you've shifted to a new climate, and nothing we have in the historical record between 1860 and 2005, the coldest year is going to be warmer than that at this projected date. So there was a research team in Hawaii led by a scientist named Camilo Mora, and what they did was they crunched the 39 global climate models using supercomputers, and they came up with the median time when different major cities around the world would be hit by this climate departure, where the coldest year would be hotter than the hottest year in the 1860 to 2005 temperature record. And you can see, we have a presenter from Sydney, that for Sydney it's 2038 under business as usual climate scenarios. For New York it's 2047. For Montreal and Toronto it's 2049. So you see these dates, they're coming up, but for quite quickly, but for places like Kingston, Jamaica, 2023. So impacts on agriculture, on food, are going to hit the global supplies at different times in different places, creating both agricultural issues, but also issues of geopolitics because of war. And so in a time of drought and climate change, we can also anticipate there'll be more conflict, more regional conflict. According to the World Health Organization, the lost productivity caused by mental health burdens is about $1 trillion per year. Why would I raise mental health burdens in the context of climate departure? Because I think it's just another force. There's precarious economies, precarious incomes, precarious industries like the arts. And if you're adding these extra pressures, like climate change, you're also adding to the burden of mental health, because it causes stress for people to go through wildfires and floods and other natural disasters, and leaves post-traumatic impact. And so there are all these health impacts that we're starting to see and that are now documented in the psychiatric literature. So here's an artist in 2002 that did a piece, Ken Lum did a piece called Mirror Maze with 12 Signs of Depression. And this is in 2002 as burdens of mental illness were starting to be documented and written up. And the last data we have in Canada for the burden of mental illness that's collected nationally is from 2002. In the United States, it's from 2005. So we have other ways of gathering statistics on mental health and more current ones. But it just shows how in step artists were with the data and what they were seeing. And that the sense of depression, 12 signs of depression, goes to how we perceive the world based on our mental, emotional, physical state, or physical and mental health profoundly impact how we perceive the world. and neuroscience has been very informative in helping us learn this. So the theme in this piece by artist Tu Greenfort, a Danish artist, it's really, the theme is sort of false appearances. There's a lake in Munster in Germany that has become so polluted from agricultural runoff that the only thing they can do to stop toxic algae from growing in the lake is to spread or to put iron chloride in the water. But that doesn't, you have to keep putting iron chloride in the water to keep the algae from growing, but the water is still completely toxic. You can't drink it, you can't bathe in it. So it's maintaining this appearance of this very important lake in Munster as this wonderful green sort of part of the city that you can go visit. So it creates this appearance of green. So Tu Greenfort was saying, well, why don't you just stop the pollution at the source? And the researchers who were working there said, well, the agricultural lobby is way too powerful, so we're just going to keep putting the iron chloride in the lake. So his arts piece is taking a manure spreader, putting it at the edge of the lake, and instead of spreading manure, he's spreading iron chloride. And this was done, the piece, the sculpture, the installation was put out in front of the lake in 2007. There's a big piece at the AGO right now by Ed Bertinsky, Jennifer Beichwal, and Nick Depensier. And it's called the Anthropocene, so the era of human-created change. And what they've done is they've created an augmented reality app. And you can look into the photo of one of the oldest Douglas firs in Canada, and it's the last one of its kind, and it's called Lonely Doug. That's the name the tree has been given. And the idea is, of course, that when you have augmented reality, maybe you will perceive the world in a new way and see the extinction threats that other species are facing, and then that could impact us. But it's interesting that we now may need virtual reality and our augmented reality experiences to touch, feel, and sense in some way the intensity of what's happening to the natural world, because in part we're so distracted by the world we're trying to adapt to in the electronic sort of miasma that we deal with every day. So this idea that augmented reality and virtual reality technologies can re-immerse us in our bodies to be completely present, to experience this thing, is intriguing, but it's also probably necessary in some sense for some people. I'm not making the critique that these things aren't going to be useful in some sense, but I'm just saying the audience gets narrowed and narrowed and narrowed until there are fewer and fewer people who can look around and sort of sense what's happening in the real world and respond to it. And part of this whole thing about climate change and the arts and futures, I think, is how do we get to the point where we actually respond to these things. So this is the level of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere on average as of October 2018. It's the Mauna Loa Observatory in Hawaii. And I love this piece by this artist. I've forgotten her last name. I think it's Kylie Thomason. But she, you just see the interconnectedness in the background of that picture of humans and animals. And so we're all in this, changed atmosphere. So we're an advanced civilization in a prehistoric atmosphere right now. The level of carbon dioxide hasn't been this high. Some estimate between 800,000 and 13 to 15 million years. And there's reliable data on 13 to 15 million, but people don't believe it because how could we, here's another thing, how could we decide whether 800,000 years out for us as citizens or 15 million years? These numbers are so far out, we're having a hard time figuring out how our arts organization will do in the next 6 to 12 months with our funding. And these numbers we're trying to imagine are so huge that's challenging for us as well. So I'll go more quickly through these pieces. Gustav Metzger developed a kind of art called autodestructive art. And his piece, Reduce Art Flights, at that time was about getting artists, to fly less so they contributed less to air pollution, but also carbon pollution. He inspired Jimi Hendrix and The Who to break their guitars on stage because of his approach to art. And he's the older gentleman in the wheelchair. Cooking Sections did a piece called on dietary norms, where they built a site installation in Scotland, and essentially you have to eat the food around the installation. And as the climate changes, you start learning how your environment is changing in relation to the food that you eat. And so they're doing a whole bunch of site installations to help us understand how we'll have to relate to food as the climate changes, because that will affect agriculture. Then Superflex, this collective, in 1996 after the Earth Summit, they did this piece called Supergas, where they worked with engineers and others to develop a way to create biogas from human excrement and manure. And so there are all these arts institutions and artist collectives that have been trying to understand how we're going to adapt to change and creating pieces and installations to query what's going on. This 10.9% is the number of people who are undernourished in the world, 821 million people, according to the Food and Agriculture Organization of the UN. And these last slides really look at place and identity. This is Mariadice Potrick, and she talks about not surrendering and cultivating urban farms in Detroit. I love the line at the back, "We shall defend our island whatever the cost may be, but am I a citizen and are we a society?" So this question of how we're going to deal with place and identity is going to be very important for us to deal with. And Jumana Mana, an artist and filmmaker, did a piece on seeds that is connected to what happened in Syria, where this institute that was saving seeds that can grow in very dry areas and drought, they were displaced from Syria, and they had to get the seeds from the Svalbard seed bank in Norway that had been put there, and then replant those seeds in the Bekaa Valley in Lebanon. And this film is all about those seeds, the open source model of seed banks versus the industrial commercial model that's developed with the Svalbard seed bank to save seeds for the future civilization. And then finally, this is the final piece in my talk today, is this notion that we have to learn again and learn about our environment again, our local environment, much like the Climavore piece that you saw earlier in Scotland. This artist created this radical gardening space. So that's a working bike, and he rode the bike through different towns and villages. And in the library of the bike are books to be photocopied on permaculture, on growing food, on all the things you need to learn that we may have lost in our learning that might need to be more scaled at a very local level to deal with shocks and stresses we're facing. So I'd like to conclude on the seeds and learning again, that being able to pay attention in a way that allows us to learn again, connect to each other in different ways to adapt to these shifts and shocks that we'll experience, will be an essential part of how we adapt to change. And the arts will have a role, but there should be no expectation that artists take the entire burden upon themselves for the failures that are, many of which are systemic. But that there is a role for the synthesis and vision of the artist and the performer is not in debate. Thank you very much.